At the edge of Central Park in Manhattan, there's a bronze statue of a doctor named James Marion Sims, whose brilliant achievement carried the fame of American surgery throughout the entire world. He's the guy who created the vaginal speculum, an instrument gynecologists use for examination. He pioneered the surgical repair for fistula, a complication from childbirth, and became known as the father of modern gynecology. But that brilliant achievement was the result of a series of excruciating experimental surgeries that he conducted on enslaved women. In a lot of ways, Sims epitomizes the story of American medicine for Black women. It's a system that's failing them to this day. From infant mortality to life expectancy, the racial disparities in healthcare are staggering. The gulf between Black and white might be widest when we look at maternal mortality, with Black women 3 to 4 times more likely to die in connection with pregnancy or birth than white women. And that divide can be traced back to doctors like Sims, who contributed to a long, largely overlooked history of institutional racism in medicine.
Trying to understand a historical problem without knowing its history is like trying to treat a patient without eliciting a thorough medical history. You're doomed to failure.
That's Harriet Washington, a medical ethicist and author who chronicled the intersection of race and medicine in her book, Medical Apartheid. While many of the stark racial disparities in healthcare can be attributed to environmental and economic factors like access to good healthcare, studies show that minority patients tend to receive a lower quality of care than non-minorities, even when they have the same types of health insurance or the same ability to pay for care.
As African Americans, we've been abused for so long, consistently by the system. Why should we trust it? Why should we go to it when ill? And that's iatrophobia. That's a fear of the healer, inculcated by the behavior of those healers, unfortunately.
It starts with slavery. Doctors relied on slave owners for financial stability. They accompanied plantation masters to auctions to verify the fitness of slaves and were called in to treat sick slaves to protect their owners' investments. In 1807, Congress abolished the importation of slaves and in turn pushed Black women to have more children, to essentially breed slaves. Founding Father Thomas Jefferson later wrote, "I consider a woman who brings a child every 2 years as more profitable than the best man on the farm." Around the 1830s, the abolitionist movement led to the rise of what was called Negro medicine, or efforts to identify Black inferiority to justify slavery. And there were polygenists who tried to use both science and the Bible to find proof that races evolve from different origins. The 1830s also marked the beginning of recorded experimentation on Black women's bodies. One doctor performed experimental C-sections on slaves. Another one perfected the dangerous ovariotomy, or removal of an ovary by testing the procedure on slave women. In fact, half the original articles in the 1836 Southern Medical and Surgical Journal dealt with experiments on Black people. And then, of course, there was James Marion Sims, whose reputation is etched in history and on that statue in Central Park. Between 1845 and 1849, Sims began performing experimental surgeries on a 17-year-old slave named Anarcha. He eventually performed 30 operations on Anarcha and more surgeries on about 11 other female slaves. When his male colleagues could no longer bear to assist him in inflicting pain on the women, the slaves took turns restraining one another. Yet paintings depicting Sims, Anarcha, and other slave women presented a subdued version of his experiments. Even though anesthesia was introduced in 1846, Sims chose not to use it for his experimentation with slaves. His practices echoed one of the most prevalent and dangerous beliefs in medicine at the time, that Black people did not feel pain or anxiety. This book from 1851, titled The Natural History of Human Species, claimed the American dark races bear with indifference tortures insupportable to a white man. Studies released as recently as last year demonstrate that Black people are less likely to be treated for pain, particularly in the ER. There's even one from a children's hospital that found the same to be true for kids. And just this year, Pearson Education, a leading educational publisher, issued an apology and recalled nursing textbooks that included racist stereotypes, like this section that said Black people often report higher pain intensity than other cultures.
Well, what does it mean when you say that someone doesn't feel pain? Among other things, you're speaking about their humanity. These are all part of that suite of beliefs emanating from the 19th century that we still have not shaken off. Despite all our knowledge and sophistication, they're deeply ingrained.
Doctors like Sims might fit the Dr. Frankenstein stereotype, but they weren't outliers. Historically, Southern doctors who used Black bodies for troubling experiments were the norm.
It's a very common question. How can we judge our forebears? Those guys in the 18th century who practiced medicine in a way that appalls us today. We think, how could you do that? I did not judge the practitioners based on our own ethics. I judged them based on the ethics of their time. It was not acceptable back then. We just did not hear from the people who protested against it.
After the Civil War ended, the 1900s brought a wave of immigrants to the U.S. It sparked a race panic and coincided with the birth of the American Eugenics movement. One of the movement's key objectives was to reduce the childbearing potential of the poor and disabled. Leaders included birth control pioneer and Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger, who eventually devised the controversial Negro Project, or family planning centers that pushed birth control in the Black South. It was a project that even garnered support from W.E.B. Du Bois, a founder of the NAACP, who wrote that Black people bred carelessly and disastrously. By the mid-1930s, more than half the states passed pro-sterilization laws. and often sterilization was forced. In 1961, future civil rights leader Fannie Lou Hamer went to the hospital to have a tumor removed, but was subjected to a hysterectomy without consent. The procedure, which rendered women infertile without their knowledge, was so common in the South that Hamer is said to have dubbed it the Mississippi appendectomy.
African American babies were no longer economically valuable. And African Americans themselves had gone from being a resource to a nuisance.
In June of 1973, the SPLC uncovered 100 to 150,000 cases of women who had been sterilized with federal funds in Alabama. Half the women were Black. In recent decades, women of color continue to be exposed to dubious reproductive health programs. In December 1990, the FDA approved a contraceptive called Norplant, and it was selectively marketed to Black teenagers in Baltimore schools.
You know, one of the current birth control methods now in the United States is Norplant.
Norplant fans like David Duke, the former KKK Grand Wizard, even introduced legislation to give women on welfare an annual reward of $100 if they agreed to get Norplant.
And it's time we start to encourage welfare mothers to be responsible.
That bill never passed, but the implant ignited a debate on whether long-term contraception, like Norplant that lasted 5 years, could be used as a form of social engineering when pushed to specific communities. Today, as we continue to lose Black mothers at alarming rates, a deeper look at the past may be a good step towards creating a more equitable healthcare system. Hi guys, thanks for watching. Of course, there's a lot more to the history of how the US medical system has mistreated people of color than we could fit in the video. Everything from the Tuskegee experiments to Jim Crow laws segregating hospitals. But we hope it starts to give some context to the racial disparities we see in medicine today. ProPublica has been reporting on the disparities in maternal mortality in the US and how it's the most dangerous industrialized country in which to give birth.
To continue to look down on us and keep this statue here is there is reverence to America's history of genocide. To continue to let this statue look down on us is reverence to America's history of genocide. That ain't right. James Marion Sims performed genital surgeries on numerous enslaved Black women without anesthesia.
James Marion Sims is lauded as the father of modern gynecology by medical institutions. There are numerous statues across the country commemorating James Marion Sims and celebrating his accomplishments.
James Marion Sims is white supremacy. To keep this statue here is reverence to America's history of genocide. Take it down. In this space, I'm inviting you to build with us a memorial to Anarcha, Lucy, Betsy, and the other 11 unnamed Black enslaved women. James Marion Sims was a doctor, a surgeon, who invented a surgery to repair the painful tears between the vagina and the rectum that some women face after childbirth. To do this, he performed numerous repeated experimental surgeries on enslaved Black women.
We cannot heal from these old wounds and grow as a country without acknowledging this dark past. Statues aren't just for remembering people or documenting history. Statues are erected so that we celebrate these people. At best, James Marion Sims was a racist man who exploited the institution of slavery for his own gain. Without the institution of slavery, there is no way that James Marion Sims would have found enough human test subjects to experiment on.
Need it! I need it! I got to have it! I got to have it! Got to have it! I got to have it! Right now! Right now! Cut us up and blood us out! Cut us up and blood us out! Ain't no healing in this town! Ain't no healing in this town! I believe that we will win! I believe that we will win!
This is Katie and Ellen. I hope they'll be to your liking.
Suit me fine.
Good night, then.
Thank you. Good night.
You a virgin?
Listen, ain't, huh, Katie? Cousin Ham, you take the virgin. I don't care for hard work.
Cousin Charles, what the hell you doing kissing on the mouth? What are you doing that for?
It makes a man feel good. She likes it too. Don't you, pretty wench?
Yes, master.
After a long day's march, the merchants allowed the slave caravans a few hours of rest on deserted plantations in the wilderness, and in sugar mills where water was always abundant.
Who are those four?
We have an appointment with them tonight. I'll explain later.
Not bad. Yeah?
Oh, Johnny, please don't make trouble, huh?
Yeah, shit. It's my friend Buzz. This is Sonny. This here's Jake. Well then, are you coming?
But isn't this illegal?
Illegal? What's legal in this goddamn place?
Money, money.
It's money he wants. There's your money. Fine. Just fine. On your feet. Come on. You see this herd? Whole damn couple belong to one trader. Was he rich, a fat hog? Not. Get out of my way. Go on. Move. You know how many poor folks there is like me in this county that ain't never owned a single one of these bastards? 80 out of 100. 80 that works for nothing and die of starvation. Make way for a white man. Get out. So there's no work for us in this shitty South, thanks to these dumb brutes. Come on, let's go.
No. 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 No, no, no. No. Hell no. No.
My relationship with Pruitt-Igoe was that of a research assistant. I went to Washington University to graduate school in 1964. I was working on a National Institute of Mental Health funded study on social problems in public housing. My role was to study women and girls in Pruitt-Igoe. I was 20 years old. I had just gotten out of college. Some of the girls were 18 years old, and I was 2 years older, but yet my life was vastly different. As time passed, I did wonder, would my life have been similar to that of the girls had my parents migrated from Mississippi to St. Louis? Would my opportunities have been different? I guess to put it bluntly, I never saw the people in Pruitt-Igoe as that different from the lives of poor people I had grown up with in Mississippi, except for one thing: the strong, tightly knit communities and families in which I grew up had begun to shatter around the people who were displaced in a northern city with few supports. And the policy and the housing authority was to move the poorest of the poor, the most dependent families, to Pruitt-Igoe.
Before we moved into Pruitt-Igoe, the welfare department came to our home. They talked with my mother about moving into the housing project, but the stipulation was that my father could not be with us. They would put us into the housing project only if he left the state. My mother and father discussed it, and they decided that it was best for the 12 children for the father to leave the home. And that's how we got into the projects.
The welfare department had a rule that no able-bodied man could be in the house if a woman received aid for dependent children. If a man lost his job, if he's looking for work, he still had to leave the home. And there was even a night staff of men who worked for the welfare department, whose job was to go to the homes of the welfare recipients, and they searched to find if there was a man in the home. Sometimes men came back at night to be with their families. Some were found in the closet hiding.
I remember vividly my mother telling us, if white people come to the house and ask you guys questions, tell them that your father is not here. Tell them that your father has never been here. You have not seen your father. I trusted her. I knew that there was a reason that we had to do this charade, and I participated in the charade. I sat there and looked those people in the eye and told them with the pure earnestness that no, I have not seen my father, and no, my daddy does not live here. And but I knew that I was lying, and that made me wonder, who are these people and how do they have the power to make my mother lie?
We're giving you money. We want to be able to control you. We're giving you money, so we have the right to make stipulations as to how you use it and what you use it for. There were so many restrictions. We couldn't have a telephone. We couldn't have a television. And we were really left at the mercy of the system.
In the project, it seemed to be strategically planned to create an environment that people felt isolated, that people felt restricted, that people felt, inhuman almost. You're bad, we have to restrain you, we have to curtail what you're doing. It was void of humanity. It was void of caring. It seemed more like a prison environment that you have to escape from.
They were treated in some ways like they were prisoners. If we are going to support you and to give you a few measly dollars to live on, then we're going to extract blood from you. You're going to live according to the rules we set. And the rules just happen to be very punitive. There was this whole undertone of morality, that they had poor morality, that they were immoral by virtue of the lifestyles they led. Poverty never created immorality. Poverty created want.
When we first moved in the projects, we couldn't have a television.
Here it is.
And then my mother got a letter that we could have TV.
Barbie's dream house is a wish come true for both of you. And look.
I was always interested in the family programs. Programs with fathers. My Little Margie, where the father was so involved with his daughter.
Margie!
Come on in, Dad.
Margie, you know I've always tried to be both mother and father to you.
You've been wonderful, Dad.
Do you remember that little game we always play when you have a problem that you can't tell your father?
But I haven't got any problems.
Now come, tell me what's wrong.
When I looked at those sitcoms, I just felt like this is the way white people lived. Because black people, from my experience, did not live that way. And I never questioned, I never wondered why. I just figured this is how it is.
We have our home here, and if the colored move in and run real estate values down, it's bound to create tension. And you will have, well, I think their aim is mixed marriages and becoming equal with the whites.
Well, I just could not live beside them. I don't feel that they should be oppressed. But I moved here, one of the main reasons was because it was a white community. And that's the only place I intend to live.
Chicago's largest public housing project. 28 buildings, 16 floors each, more than 20,000 certified residents, poor people stacked on top of one another, their problems multiplied, intensified.
You carry your children downstairs and they play, and you never know what's going to happen. You know, you be sitting down there playing 1 minute, and whenever the fellas get into a rage and want to start shooting, or, you know, a little scuffle come between them, you have to run, and you can't run to the elevator because who gonna wait for the elevator when somebody's shooting?
See the mama come down, swept kid's brains up right there. I saw all that. See them shot all around the front there, everywhere. I see all that. All out in the playground.
Life at Robert Taylor is dominated by welfare, women, and children. A high percentage of Taylor residents receive public aid, and almost 90% of Taylor's households are one-parent families, one woman, that is, with an average of 4 children. At age 23, Janice Love is part of that pattern. She has only 2 children, but they represent the 3rd generation in her family to live or grow up here. For her and hundreds of other women who live here, the absence of a man in the home is considered neither unusual nor necessarily a handicap.
You can have some parents where it's just rough in the household with that man. You got to deal with him, you got to deal with the children, and that's a burden on you too. You got some that's just as worse as the children. You got 3, if you say you got 2 children and a man and yourself, you got 3 children. You got to look after him and the 2 children and the house. So sometimes it's all right and sometimes it isn't for some people.
Can't no man love me
the way I love me. I'm every woman. It's all in me. Hello? Hey girl. What you doing? Me? Nothing. About to take myself on a date to the movies. I have devoted my life to the Lord. Jesus is the only man I need. See, let me tell y'all something. Can't no man love me the way I love me. You always say that I do not need a man. I don't need a man to be happy. A man can't make me happier than I can make myself. I make myself happy. No, because I can make myself happy. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is worth far above rubies. I'm worth far above rubies. See, I don't need a man. I have the Lord. See, you don't see me in these streets with no confusing relationship issues. You don't see me in the streets like that out here. What bae? I ain't got no bae unless bae mean being alone every day. Favor is deceitful. Beauty is vain. But a woman who feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. I love myself, cause other than that, I ain't got no bae. Amen. Amen. INDEPENT. Amen. Amen. TNDT. Do you know what that means? See, let me tell you something. These dudes need to really, really realize something. I am every woman and every man. Lord, please send me a man. Lord, please send me a man.
Something that Jane said about the angry black woman. And who are the black women you see on the local news at night in cities all over the country? They're usually angry about something.
The most disrespected person in America is the black woman. The most unprotected person in America is the black woman. The most neglected person in America is the black woman.
I think about all that black women do for society and how the thank you that we get is just constant disrespect, how we're not protected, how we're sexualized and fetishized in the media, how it's kind of like we're abandoned.
Society does not have a black woman's back. She didn't even do anything. She just was being black.
When you're born and you're born a woman, you already have one thing stacked against you. You're born and you're a black woman, you have both of those things stacked against you. You just have to work hard as fuck. And there's no system in place to help you thrive.
It's really sad to think about how young it is that we all internalize those things. I may not have had the words for it, but I knew that I wasn't going to be accepted being a 4C, dark-skinned, thick black girl. I just knew that.
People in elementary school who would call me a monkey or something like that, and
It's sad that we like to think that we've come so far, but we haven't.
It's mind-boggling, the fact that Black people in general, and then also Black women, are still being compared to animals.
I feel like I'm a very strong person, but I'm always afraid to show that I'm too strong, because I'm always afraid that it will play into that stereotype and all of a sudden I'll be looked at as masculine because of these stereotypes that are put upon Black women.
Black women should be quiet into themselves and sort of have their heads down and just like kind of try and blend in. You are not allowed to be a bigger woman, tall, and also stand up tall and be confident. It's just like not allowed. The thing that makes me most angry is the fact that I feel like no one really has my back except other Black women. It's really tough to feel alone in a fight to be seen as equal and just as successful and just as amazing as anyone else.
The variety of Black women is really important in media because we are seen as only one thing, and that's sassy, or we have too much attitude, and we can never be anything else without that. There's no such thing as an angry Black woman, but a Black woman who happens to be angry.
I'm gonna do everything that I can to then channel that very deep pit of anger that I have into something to show you that that's not who I am, that's not who I've ever been, that's not who Leslie is, that's not who Michelle Obama is. Like, I get that that bullshit is out there, so then I'm like, what can I do with my work, with my art, to change that, to change the narrative, to tell people that, you know, we're more than this.
For the young Black girl out there, I would say think about all the things that we contribute every day to society and how we built this country on our backs, like we did it. So think about how, even though that's a tragedy, think about how awesome we are. Like, all the shit that we have gone through, we still win the gold medal. I mean, come on.
You are worthy, you are beautiful, and no one gets to take that away from you. Like, the minute that you let somebody else dictate who you are and your beauty, like, you've already given that to them. I don't get, like, you don't get my worth, it's my worth.
And just because someone lays down rules of what is beautiful, that doesn't mean that you have to agree with that.
I think that it is important, though, that when you are feeling that intensely about any kind of injustice or some kind of you know, people belittling you for something that you don't deserve to be belittled for, it is important to be in that moment when you feel it, but then I don't want to live in it.
down, down they go. Into the darkness of the grave, gently they go. The beautiful, the tender, the kind. Quietly they go. The intelligent, the witty, the brave. I know, but I do not approve. And I am not resigned.
In 1951, a woman died in Baltimore in America. She was called Henrietta Lacks. These are cells from her body. They were taken from her just before she died. They have been growing and multiplying ever since. There are now billions of these cells in laboratories around the world. If massed together, they would weigh 400 times her original weight. These cells have transformed modern medicine, but they also became caught up in the politics of our age. They shaped the policies of countries and of presidents. They even became involved in the Cold War, because scientists were convinced that in her cells lay the secret of how to conquer death. In 1860, a plantation owner in Virginia called Benjamin Lacks took a black mistress from among his workers. She bore him 2 children. They took their father's name, and for 3 generations the Lacks family worked in the fields. Then, in 1942, his great-granddaughter, Henrietta Lacks, decided to move to the city. She took her husband and family to Baltimore. It was wartime, and there was money to be made. She was known to all her friends as Henny.
Oh, my goodness, I don't think I could top her. Henny was a beautiful girl. I was beautiful myself. I called myself it back in them days. But Henny was very, very pretty. Beautiful face, round face. And I used to admire her dressing because she used to dress real fancy. I dressed good too, but she had a husband and she could afford fine dressing. And she liked pretty things. She likes nice things.
The cells stop growing, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes something happens to start them growing again, uncontrolled, dividing again, outlaws. Pressing on healthy tissues, healthy organs, growing, spreading throughout the body to start new malignant colonies. This is cancer.
6 miles away from where Henrietta lived was the laboratory of Dr. George Guy. Dr. Guy's ambition was to rid the world of cancer. He was convinced that the secret of how to do this lay inside the human cell. For 20 years, he had been trying to grow human cells in test tubes.
Dr. Guy's simple dream was to be the first to successfully sustain the growth of human cells outside the body, so that in test tubes, the secret of cancer cause could be exposed, and once exposed, altered and corrected.
The key, Dr. Guy believed, was to feed the cells on chicken blood. He did this by drawing blood from the heart of live chickens. He then mixed it with cancer tissue taken from patients in Baltimore's main hospital. His aim was to persuade the cancer cells to keep growing outside the body. Each time he filmed the results, but every attempt failed. After a few days, the cells always died. Then, on February the 1st, 1951, Henrietta Lacks was taken to Baltimore's main hospital. She had been sent to see a gynecologist.
I just happened to be the one who saw her when she first came in. And her history was very simple. She had had some intermenstrual spotting and bleeding, which is a sign of cancer, but it can be a sign of other things too. She was generally fine. There was no difficulty with the general examination. But on examination of the cervix by the eye with a suitable instrument, I was extremely impressed, and I can see that lesion today because it was not like an ordinary cancer. This was different. This didn't look like cancer. It was purple, and it bled very easily on touching. I'd never seen anything that looked like it, and I don't think I've ever seen anything look like it since. So it was a very special, different kind of what turned out to be a tumor.
Cancer? As usual, a small piece of the cancerous tissue was cut off and taken to Dr. Guy.
I was eating lunch. We always ate lunch right in the laboratory, next to the mouse cages. And Dr. Guy came in with a petri dish, and he said that there was a specimen to put into culture. And what he had left me was a chunk of tumor tissue, and I took my scalpels like this. These were sterile, and the tissue would be in a petri dish like this, and you just cut it up, just like you're cutting up some meat. And then you added, according to his formula, so many drops of chicken plasma, just like I had done all the others. And lo and behold, it grew.
Henrietta Lacks' cells began to do what Guy had dreamed of. They started to grow in his laboratory. This is the film he took of their first week's growth.
Henrietta was sick. She was sick. You could hear her sometime all the way downstairs hollering. Oh, Lord, oh, Lord. I can't get no ease. Her stomach would be hurting her so bad. Jesus, help me. Help me. I didn't never hear nobody say that she had cancer. Nobody, you know, that was a secret word one time. If people had cancer, they didn't talk about it. They didn't talk about it. They was afraid.
These are Henrietta Lacks' cells, filmed 6 weeks later. Each cell is now dividing every 20 hours. For any cancer, it was a record growth rate.
The cells exhibited the same growth in the test tube as they exhibited in her, namely that they were unstoppable and continued to grow in a very special way. So it was the first human cell line. Her tumor, incidentally, did not respond well to treatment.
Henrietta Lacks died on October the 4th, 1951.
Tonight, we will learn why scientists believe that cancer can be conquered.
That same evening, Dr. Guy appeared on a television science program to show off his breakthrough.
Now let me show you a bottle in which we have grown massive quantities of cancer cells.
As he held Henrietta Lacks' cells up to the camera, his assistant was in the autopsy room. Dr. Guy had sent her to get more of the precious cells from the dead body.
And I was all alone with my petri dish. And I walked in, and she was all completely open. And just, you could look in and see tumor everywhere on all the tissues. And her bladder was one complete solid mass of tumor.
We will show you some actual pictures of colonies in a test tube of cancer cells such as those I just showed you. It is quite possible that from fundamental studies such as these, that we will be able to learn a way by which cancer can be completely wiped out.
Henrietta Lacks' body was taken back south to be buried. Dr. Guy kept what he had done a secret from her family. He was worried they might sue him. He gave the cells a code name, HeLa, H-E-L-A, and told everyone they came from a woman called Helen Lane. Henrietta Lacks was forgotten by science, but her cells were about to become world famous. For the first time, anything could be tested on living human cells. Her cells were sent into space, accompanied by 2 white mice. The aim was to find out what would happen to human flesh in zero gravity. Cosmetic companies bought millions of her cells to test for possible side effects in their new products. The American military placed large flasks of HeLa cells next to atomic tests. They wanted to see what the effects of radiation would be on human tissue. And then came polio. HeLa cells were the perfect host on which to grow and study the polio virus. From this came the development of the vaccine that conquered the disease. And polio raised a further question. Might cancer too be caused by a virus? And if it was, could it too be cured?
It was hoped in the 50s that a virus could be discovered that had been a major cause of cancer and a vaccine developed to that virus to control cancer. And because Henrietta Lacks' cells were cancerous, they had to have the secret of what cancer was and how you could kill it.
The first step was to find out whether, like polio, cancer was infectious. Two scientists went to a maximum security prison in Ohio. They took with them large quantities of Henrietta Lacks' cells.
This is the first suspension that we'll be using this morning, and down at the bottom here you can see quite a pellet of concentrated cancer cells. This material, the suspension of cells, will then be taken up into a tuberculin syringe and merely injected underneath the skin of the forearm through an area that has been anesthetized with Novocaine.
They were inoculating them with HeLa cells under the skin to see if the HeLa cells would grow and cause a cancer. It seemed a very eminently reasonable thing to do. How else are you going to find out if HeLa cells in fact do, spread and cause cancer?
Well, now, why did you volunteer for this?
My grandmother, my father both died of cancer. And I believe that wrong that I have done in the eyes of society this might make a right on it. I don't know.
Some of the prisoners developed small tumours, but not full-blown cancer. The results were inconclusive.
Then they cut out the lower one on my arm, as you see here. The top one, they called me back after 14 days, and it did not have to be removed. It had died out in my system. So that is, they think that there's what they're trying to find, immunity to it.
But then other evidence emerged that seemed to prove there really might be a cancer virus. Henrietta Lacks was no longer alone in the cell world. Suddenly it seemed very easy to grow cells outside the body. Some were cancerous, others were normal. This is a heart cell growing inside a Petri dish. Each cell is beating with the same rhythm as the heart from which it came.
Out of this original push, attempts now proliferated everywhere to grow human cells, and many of them were successful. By God, they had cells from lung, and they had cells suddenly growing and rapidly from a variety, a whole spectrum of human tissues.
I had prostate surgery, and since the prostate grows so well in the body, I thought, well, it should be able to grow pretty well in our laboratory. So I made arrangements to have the surgeon cut off a piece of the prostate that is removed, mince it up with scissors, very fine, sharp scissors, in a sterilized fashion. Because the finer you mince, the better you have, the better chance you have of getting a better yield of cells.
In the hunt to start new cell lines, other cell biologists turned to their own families.
I decided that I would try to establish a cell line from the amnion at the birth of one of my children. And on the day of my daughter's birth, I appeared with my wife and the collecting materials, which I gave to the nurse. And the material was duly collected. I took it back to the laboratory after assuring myself that my wife and new daughter were healthy. And within a few hours, I could look through the microscope and see the cells from my daughter's amnion.
Then the strangest thing began to happen. Many of the normal cell lines suddenly developed cancer. Normal cells lying open in the laboratory would abruptly transform into malignant cancer cells. It became known as spontaneous transformation.
I observed in the culture an island of cells that looked different from the normal cell population. Because of my experience with cells by that time, I knew that this was what we then called a spontaneous transformation. That is, the spontaneous acquisition of cancer cell properties by a normal cell in culture.
There was now a growing belief that inside malignant cell lines like Henrietta Lacks's was a cancer virus. If it could be found and isolated, cancer would be conquered. But it was going to take a great deal of money. Help came from a woman called Mary Lasker. She was a Millionaire Society hostess in New York.
I think this is one of the most exciting still lifes that Matisse ever did. It's full of color and warmth. I have some pictures here by Cézanne and Manet and Renoir.
Lasker's husband had died of cancer. Since then, she had devoted herself to a crusade. She wanted the government to fund a vast project, like the space program, to cure cancer.
Believe it or not, the amount of money that's being spent for medical research is, well, it's just piddling. And you won't believe this, less is spent on cancer research than we spend on chewing gum.
But cancer was low on the political agenda. To persuade the politicians, Mary Lasker needed to find the promise of a simple cure. Then one of her scientist friends, Matilda Krim, told her about the virus cancer theory.
To Mary Lasker, the virus theory of cancer was very exciting when she heard of it. It seemed to offer a point of attack to the cancer problem, you know. Knowing the enemy is always useful. She called me one day and she says, Matilda, we have to push this campaign for cancer research because this is something the public will be in favor of. Everybody's afraid of cancer. We together started this campaign for cancer research.
I'm Bing Crosby, and I am on stage. And that means the show's begun.
Lasker and Krim turned to Hollywood. They persuaded the stars to appear in network television shows. Their job was to speak publicly about the thing of which everyone was terrified.
Today, I'm 53 years old. I have a family consisting of 6 kids and a wife whom I adore. And I also have lung cancer.
You are nobody till somebody loves you.
Their other task was to broadcast the confident promises of the scientists.
It is my belief that we are now witnessing the beginning of a great explosion of knowledge about this disease, which will culminate in its complete control.
Even if I'm gone when you see me speak these words to you, let me join you in this crusade, and let's make this world a world that's cancer-free.
But at the very moment when the stars were promising the end of cancer, the cell biologists realized there was something seriously wrong with their science. And the reason was Henrietta Lacks and her cells. It began when a scientist called Stanley Gartler examined many of the major cell lines. He discovered that all of them secreted the same form of enzyme. It was a type found only in black people. The problem was that all the cell lines he looked at came from whites. The only black cell line was Henrietta Lacks. At a packed meeting of cell biologists, Gartler announced the inescapable conclusion.
He told them, folks, cell lines that are presumably derived from other tissues in different individuals are not such. These are cells from Henrietta Lacks. If you think you have been working with breast cells, you're wrong. If you think you've been working with lung cells, you're wrong. And kidney cells, you're wrong. You're working with cells derived from a human female uterus. And that's that. And it was very embarrassing, and it's very shocking to many people, and there was a great alarum.
I couldn't believe it. He was saying that this enzyme is present only among blacks. So, ergo, this tissue did not come from you. You're white. It must have come from black. If it came from black, it probably came from HeLa. So you mixed your cells with HeLa. Whether he's, I say he's wrong. I say he's wrong.
Many of the cell biologists refused to believe Gartler. But for those who had developed cell lines from their own flesh and blood, the only other explanation was even worse.
What Gartler was saying about my daughter's cells was that they had enzyme characteristics of a black parent, which is the reason I ran to the telephone to speak with my wife. And she assured me that I had nothing to worry about. I'm not black, and neither is my wife.
Leonard Hayflick never believed what he was hearing. In his particular case, because it involved his own blood, his own cells. It involved, really, to get down to a cellular level, it involved his own sperm and that of the egg of his wife.
To me, it had absolutely no importance whatsoever, other than my intellectual curiosity.
Bogus. It was a scandal. It was, to put it mildly, something terribly, terribly wrong.
The problem was that no one fully understood how Henrietta Lacks's cells had contaminated the other cell lines. There was something wrong in cell biology, but no one knew how big or quite what the problem was. Meanwhile, Mary Lasker had succeeded with her campaign. She had got to the president.
Mary Lasker made of cancer a subject to which politicians had to pay attention.
President is here, ladies and gentlemen.
And she would go to the White House, either alone or as a guest at a big dinner, and so she pulled out her little notebook and she read the numbers to the president. How many dead, how many sick, how much it costs. And she would say to Johnson, in no time we're going to discover tumor-inducing viruses in humans, and we should have a vaccine against these viruses. You know, that's power. And he performed perfectly.
Someday I hope and I'm going to pray for we will find a cure for cancer. And I want it done in my time. I want to play my part in it. I want to do something about it. The loneliest moment I ever had in my life was when I learned that my mother was gone from me because of this terrible disease.
Politicians now vied with each other to find a relative who had died of cancer.
My favorite aunt, my Aunt Elizabeth, died with cancer when she was 32 years of age. And she was a wonderful person for withering away with cancer.
In 1971, Mary Lasker triumphed. She persuaded President Nixon to announce a national war on cancer.
I will also ask for an appropriation of an extra $100 million to launch an intensive campaign to find a cure for cancer, and I will ask later for whatever additional funds can effectively be used. The time has come in America when the same kind of concentrated effort that split the atom and took man to the moon should be turned toward conquering this dread disease.
The promise Nixon held out to the American people was an end to cancer. Millions of dollars were to be given to the scientists who promised they could find the cancer virus. It was the biggest medical research program ever organized. And at its heart were the cell lines. But those in charge of the cell lines knew there was a problem with contamination. They appointed a scientist, Walter Nelson Rees, to investigate just how bad the problem was.
We began to probe and to investigate, purposely looking, not necessarily purposely looking for a mistake, but wanting to know the details of individual cells.
And what did you begin to find?
And what we began to find was that many, many, many of these cell lines, I mean, eventually over 100 cell lines were alike. And were alike to HeLa.
Nelson Rees discovered that HeLa had a power unlike any other cell line. If just one HeLa cell was dropped by mistake into another culture, or blown across the laboratory by a current of air, this cell would begin to grow and multiply faster than its host.
It represented what cancer was dreaded for. a single cell has gone awry. It grows uncontrolled.
And the problem was to become much worse. Nelson Rees discovered HeLa cells in places where it didn't seem possible. Building 41 was the most secure laboratory in the world. It had airlocks and a special ventilation system. It had been built to contain the deadly cancer virus when it was found. Nelson Rees examined a breast cell line being used inside the building. He was convinced it had been contaminated by HeLa, but this was impossible. HeLa cells had never been allowed inside Building 41.
Walter Nelson Rees contacted me one day and said he had gotten this line from somebody who got it from me, and he said basically that they're HeLa cells, they're not breast cells at all. The reason I was so suspicious of its being HeLa cells is we didn't have HeLa cells in our lab, and I really couldn't see how it was possible.
But HeLa had got into Building 41 in disguise. Other cell lines, already contaminated, had been brought in from outside. No one knew that these were infected by HeLa. But then Nelson Rees discovered something even more alarming. He examined what was believed to be the original stock of the breast cell line, HBT3. He found that even these were all HeLa. There had never been any breast cells at all.
We had several freezes of HBT3, and we tested every one of them, and they were all HeLa cells. The inescapable conclusion is that the first cell that landed in that Petri dish to grow was a HeLa cell.
So had you ever managed to grow a breast cell?
No, sir, never did. Kind of got out of the business very quickly after this happened.
Why is she so powerful?
That I can't answer. One just simply does not know what the constitution is of HeLa cells. One does not know what the constitution is, why it is that in spite of insults, human insults, insults in culture, temperature changes, letting them lie overnight on the counter without being incubated, there'll always be a HeLa cell growing.
What Nelson Rees had discovered began to undermine the war on cancer. At its headquarters in the suburbs north of Washington, urgent meetings were held. If Nelson Rees was right, hundreds of the cell lines on which the whole program depended were contaminated. It meant that all the research done using these lines was suspect.
Was he right?
Of course he was right. And it turned out later, you know, when we took all the cooperating laboratories and went back and looked at everything, we found out it was right.
How serious is that?
Well, I would say that virtually all of the scientific conclusions that I've reached are worthless.
It is devastating, ultimately, to have wasted 3 years, 4 years on the wrong cells. If your entire program was built upon the study of specifically what's going on in your cell system, you're working with the wrong cell line. It's comparable to thinking you're living in a palace and actually you're living in a cabin, in a log cabin somewhere. It's not just that this culture was contaminated with HeLa, it's that the entire scientific community in one way or another is contaminated with the wrong information, with the wrong results, and with no advance.
It was becoming clear that the scientists had completely misunderstood the evidence in front of their eyes. Some now began to question the original theory of spontaneous transformation. It said that cells spontaneously turned into cancer in the laboratory because of a virus. But maybe the cancer had not been caused by a virus. Maybe it had simply been a contamination by HeLa. Could this mean there was no such thing as the cancer virus? But then, the Russians found the cancer virus. In November 1972, an American delegation of scientists visited Moscow. The Russians told them that they had found the human cancer virus in 5 different cell lines. It was the breakthrough.
Well, they were claiming they had discovered the human cancer virus, that this was a human tumor virus growing in human cancer cells isolated from different organs. And there were, like, 5 different laboratories in Moscow that had the similar claim. As simple as that.
It's possible that the Russians had this, and they thought it's possible that they had it. Politically, it would have been a tremendous thing for them. It would have been a true finding. It would have truly established them in the eyes of all the world. That indeed they were the first to isolate a human tumor virus, which we were looking for, which we were working toward all of these years of the virus cancer program.
It was a proud moment for the Russians. They sent samples of the 5 cell lines to the Americans. All their visitors could offer in return was a box containing viruses that caused cancer in animals.
National Institute of Health, USA. А в ней вирусы животных, вирусы опухолей животных, те, на которых производилось все исследования в то время. Это мышиные вирусы вот в этой коробке. Здесь вирусы куриные вирусы.
Как отзывались на этот подарок?
Очень хорошо. Ну, прекрасно. Но это от сердца.
The Americans immediately flew the Russian cells back to Washington. They were taken in great secrecy to the headquarters of the War on Cancer.
Our purpose was to test their viruses and their cells for the known viruses. There was evidence that the Russians had been correct, that there was a viral reverse transcriptase in the supernatants from these cells.
So they had viruses?
They did have virus. But it was our job to confirm everything we had been told. So the cells were also examined to demonstrate that they were of human origin. This is when we sent them to Walter Nelson Reese.
These cells were treated with kid gloves. This was a precious arrival of something extraordinary, because something was showing up in these cells that was new, novel, exciting. And these cells were going to be handled very carefully, and only until they had been examined thoroughly was anything going to be said about them, done with them, sent to other people, or anything, God forbid, anything published on these particular cells, because this was a breakthrough. And sooner than not, the results came back, and all of these cell lines had type AG6PD, which meant to us that they were derived from black individuals, probably from 20% of a black population. Now, I knew about Lumumba University. I knew that there was a large contingent of African blacks in Moscow. But you know, I just thought there's something fishy here. It just can't be.
So Nelson Reese examined the chromosomes of the Russian cells. He found they were all identical to HeLa. It meant only one thing. Somehow, some of Henrietta Lacks' cells had got through the Iron Curtain. And the virus the Russians found turned out to be no more than a harmless monkey virus. She had picked it up on her journey to Moscow. Then the Russians arrived in Washington for their return visit. How did you go about telling them the bad news?
It was difficult. As I recall, we had one of the joint meetings of the two delegations in Bethesda. The Russian scientists on one side of the table, and the Americans on the other side, and all this sort of thing. We even brought in the scientist, Walter Nelson Reese, who had worked on this one cell line that they thought was a human tumor cell line producing product.
It inadvertently became a national and international event, because I was clearly blurting out the fact that this was one and the same cell line, albeit perhaps different cultures, of cells from Henrietta Lacks with the same identical virus growing on them, and had nothing to do with some new discovery. And this is a slap in the face.
Нельсон Рис, он показал по хромосомам, по характерным хромосомам и по характерному маркерному ферменту, он смог идентифицировать линии, которые на самом деле являются HeLa, так сказать, не соответствуют своему названию, на самом деле являются HeLa. Ну, в общем, это уже сразу стало ясно, что и в Америке линии загрязнены, во всем мире, и к нам. Они же пришли, они не у нас были выведены, эти линии, они же тоже к нам пришли из Америки, из Европы.
Наверное, отреагировали. Наверное, отреагировали. Ну, может, старались не очень показывать это дело. Так. Не очень показывать.
At a press conference, the Russians tried to put a brave face on events.
Позвольте прежде всего поблагодарить
Permit me, first of all, to thank
правительство Соединенных Штатов
the government
за
of the United States
приглашение
of
нашей
America.
делегации.
Our delegation considers this trip to be very beneficial and very useful.
Sure. May I please intervene? I don't think it's fair to the minister to ask him to comment on specific individuals.
But the news had leaked out, although the Americans attempted to hush it up.
Although we attempted to play it down considerably, the Russian episode was visible and newsworthy enough that it contributed to the increasing skepticism about the way the virus cancer program would find the human tumor virus. Another example of a failure for a claim to be upheld. And as a result, then, people begin to believe there is no claim that will be upheld.
By the mid-70s, those in charge of the war on cancer realized they were as far away as ever from understanding why cells became cancerous. Billions of dollars had been spent, but they had found no virus.
And so political pressure and all of this sort of thing started building up. And sooner or later, they came to realize that, well, the virus cancer program isn't that great. You have not come across a human tumor virus yet, and you've been in business since 1964. The program died. I'm not saying it died a miserable death, it just disappeared.
What had begun as a vast project to push back the boundaries of death had failed. The secret of what made human cells turn into cancer and grow and divide ceaselessly remained elusive. But the scientists and politicians had raised enormous expectations. They had turned cancer into a public enemy and promised to conquer it. And those expectations remained.
The 2 million American men and women who are leading the fight against cancer. I am not resigned to the shutting away of loving hearts in the hard ground. So it is and so it will be. The best is lost. The honest look, the laughter, the love, they're gone. They're gone to feed the roses. I know, but I do not approve. And I am not resigned.
But at this very moment of scientific despair, a new theory of how to conquer cancer emerged. And yet again, behind its rise to power, was Henrietta Lacks and her cells. It came from a new generation of scientists who believed that cancer was not caused by a virus from outside. It came from inside, from the genes.
The genetic theory of the cause of cancer said that the enemy is within, it's in your genes. So from the very moment you're born, the bomb is ticking away inside of you. It's much more difficult, it's more insidious. We have to intervene within your own body, we have to be more intrusive, we can't keep it away. You had to probe and uncover the bad DNA.
But up to this time, there had been no way of identifying particular genes. Then an English geneticist called Professor Harris found a way.
Professor Harris fused HeLa cells with a mouse cell. The resulting cells, the clones of cells that are then isolated, have different elements of the HeLa cell genetics. It allowed people to try to map genes to different chromosomes, and this was a fundamental tool in the development of gene mapping.
Henrietta Lacks now became an object of fascination for geneticists. They wanted to know everything about her, not just her cells, but her entire genetic history. The problem was, she was dead.
You couldn't study her genetics because she had died. So the only way to figure out what she was genetically, in terms of all these different markers, was to go back to her family.
In 1976, a team of geneticists set out to track down the remaining members of the Lacks family. They found her husband and 4 of her children still living in Baltimore.
I say it was about 15 or 20 years after she'd been dead, and they wanted to do this genetic research to find out whether any of the kids carried the same gene that she carried or whatever. So they wanted blood, so they came, and they asked permission to draw blood from her children.
A doctor and a nurse came to the house and had all of us there. The blood test they did on us, they took blood tests from each one of the kids, each one of my mother's kids, and they told us that they just tested it to see if what my mother had was hereditary.
I said, "You're working on her cells?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Her cells are still alive." And I just, you know how I was just truly amazed. And he said he'd been working on it for years.
And it like took us by surprise. We never knew this. And there's another thing that got me upset with him, like, is there anything else I don't know? And it can get scary when you think about it. I mean, how much of ourselves is out there, you know?
The new technology of gene mapping gave geneticists a feeling of power and confidence. They became convinced that they would find the cause of cancer. They would open up the cell and isolate the cancer genes. And yet again, Hollywood became involved. The stars turned out to fund the scientists who offered a new promise. They would find the cancer genes and then repair or replace them. And cancer would be cured.
What you're here to support tonight is something that is somewhat of a new approach to try and identify and understand the basic mechanisms that change a normal cell into a malignant cell. And then once we understand these mechanisms, to try and direct our therapy specifically at those alterations.
Well, their view of the world is that if I knew the sequence of a gene, I would know what it does. And if I know what it does, then I'll be able to replace its faulty operation by giving it something else. And so people give them lots of money, they give them their faith, they believe in them, they hope in them, because they're going to save me by screwing around with your genes.
And if cancer could be cured, one could make a great deal of money. The new biotechnology firms, which grew up in the 80s, seized on the promises being made by the scientists.
The scientists said to the capitalists, we now have a technology that's going to enable us to cure cancer. And it was more than hope. It was a belief. And it fostered the biotechnology industry. I mean, if it was possible to conquer cancer, you're probably talking about the largest market in the world. And remember, all human beings are equal. There's almost no other products outside of bullets that work on all people equally. And so suddenly there was an opportunity to make a lot of money.
They're profiting off of her while her family remains ignorant of all the things about her.
Because they've taken the cells and used it without permission. They have also distributed without permission.
Does she belong to the family?
And they also have research, you know. And one reason, because this is a family matter.
Thank you. Sell it to him. Sell it. 5,000 Genentech.
The Lacks family began to learn more about what had been done with their mother's cells. They decided to approach lawyers to see if they could claim some of the money.
I went to the lawyers because I wanted to find out what is happening with her cell. From my research, I found out that they selling her cells all over the world. And I just wanted to find out who is making money off my mother's cells. I was kind of angry about it, or mad about it in a way, because it was something that no one knew about.
The lawyers approached most of the major biotechnology and pharmaceutical companies. Everywhere they were turned away. It seemed they had no legal case. Henrietta Lacks had died too long ago. Faced by this, the Lacks family decided that if they couldn't win any money, they would fight for recognition for their mother. They began a campaign which was picked up by radical black magazines.
We got a lot of pictures of around here like this, around the market, up John Hopkins Hospital. We just want to make them aware of who she was. The reason why I think they're not trying to acknowledge is because she's black. I think if it was the other way around, if she's a white female, I think they would have been acknowledged and they would know who she is right now.
The Lacks family became convinced that their mother's death somehow represented a kind of heroism. It had been a sacrifice by a black woman for the rest of the world.
The most famous woman in the world in medical history, the only woman in the medical history that holds this title, you know, to me, I don't think they want blacks to hold that title.
But the promise of finding a cure for cancer is yet again beginning to fade. By the early 90s, scientists had identified many genes associated with cancer. But these genes are only one part in a complicated sequence of events that lead to cancer. The human body is far more complicated than scientists thought. The public optimism is giving way to a new skepticism.
We don't have a single case, not a single case, where knowledge of the DNA sequence of a gene has led to a treatment for the disease. Knowing all the genes in the human genome is in itself not information on how the human body works. If you want to know how the human body works, you have to look at the proteins, the cell organelles, the machinery of the body as a whole. The DNA information is not sufficient.
The dream didn't happen. The dream of winning the war on cancer, the dream of making a lot of money did happen for a lot of people. The dream of finding ways to help some patients with cancer happened. But the dream to cure cancer has not and did not happen.
Are we any nearer curing cancer than we were 50 years ago?
No, certainly not. In particular cases, we are in better control of the conditions for chemical attacks on cancer, knowing exactly what chemicals to give. Lives are extended by either burning the cancer out or cutting it out or killing it with chemicals. And there are no other ways. And there are not likely to be.
So is the promise of a genetic cure for cancer an illusion?
Yes.
It really is?
Yes. I don't know what more to say.
Running, 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 I can't tarry.
Morehouse College in Atlanta is one of the oldest black universities in America.
If my mother don't go, I can't tarry.
Last October, on the 45th anniversary of Henrietta Lacks' death, it honoured her and her family. It was the culmination of their campaign for the recognition of their mother.
I'm running up the King's Highway.
The city of Atlanta acknowledges the contributions of Henrietta Lacks for advancing the medical and scientific efforts for cancer, polio, and many other diseases, and on behalf of the citizens of Atlanta, hereby proclaim October 11th as Henrietta Lacks Day in our city. Signed, William Campbell.
The family now became celebrities.
Would you give us some response on your emotional comments at this time?
Well, I think I was part of a miracle because when she was pregnant with me, she was dying of cancer. Oh. See, only little outcome I had of that, I stayed in the hospital a whole year with a spot of tuberculosis. Since then, I've been having a clean bill of health, and she's done, tremendous, miraculous help for other people. She deserved it.
As a result of the campaign, Henrietta Lacks has become a scientific heroine. But in reality, she has defeated science. For 45 years, scientists have struggled to understand her cells and cure cancer. But a growing number of scientists believe that even if they understood why Henrietta's cells grow and divide ceaselessly, they could not cure the disease. there is a new pessimism in science.
I can know the cause of lots of things. I know the causes of the tides, but I can't stop them. I know the causes of hurricanes, but I can't stop them. I know the current causes of death. And even if I can prevent some of the current causes of death, I cannot stop death. It's here to stay. All flesh is as the grass.
HeLa will live forever, perhaps. The dance of HeLa continues. They are all dancing out there somewhere along the line, and they're still on the stage somewhere, I'm sure. The stage is very broad and wide, and the curtain has by no means gone down on them, and the music plays on.
But do you think them cells still living? I'm talking about in the grave. Oh, no, I don't guess they are.
But they're living elsewhere.
They're still living out in the test tubes. That's a miracle.
There are 1.5 million missing black men in America due to mass incarceration. But what you might not know is that the fastest growing prison population isn't men, it's women. Many think of prisoners as perpetrators, but in many cases, they're also victims. A harrowing amount. The vast majority of women who are incarcerated are survivors of sexual abuse. And it isn't uncommon to find survivors of violence who are serving sentences for fighting back against their abusers. Dying at the hands of an intimate partner is sadly not uncommon for women, especially black women, who are 2 times more likely to be killed. Half of them after trying to leave the relationship. Should women be put behind bars for defending themselves? Recently, the case of Cyntoia Brown, a young woman who was sex trafficked as a child and found guilty of murdering her abuser, was popularized because of the vocal support of celebrities. But her case is not new, and there are many women like her in prisons all over the country. I met with Valerie Seeley, a domestic abuse survivor, to hear her personal story. Valerie served 17 years of a 19-year sentence for killing her abuser while trying to defend herself. She was released last year through clemency.
New Year's Day, I was fed up and I said that I was leaving. I was on the phone waiting for my mother to pick up, and he attacked me. He tried to wrap the telephone cord around my neck. And I managed to get away from him, and I ran for the door, but I wasn't fast enough, and he caught me, and he slammed me up against the bathroom door, and he started choking me, and he was like, before I let you leave, I'll kill you. I can't breathe. I seen my life flashing in front of me. I knew that I was really gonna die. I was feeling for something to get him to turn loose my neck. And I hit him, and he let my neck go. And I looked down, I realized that it was actually a knife in my hand, and I dropped it. And that's when I seen the blood seeping through his fingers. And the last thing he said before he fell back was that, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for it to turn out this way." What led up to it, we had been arguing, and he had been attacking me. I went through the physical abuse, the emotional abuse. Every time I go to sleep, I would wake up, and he would be standing over me to suffocate me, to wrap things around my neck. So I stopped sleeping. I wasn't eating. I was 73 pounds when I got locked up. I reached out for help. I talked to my pastor. I talked to my therapist. I called all the domestic violence hotlines, and all of them told me the same thing. We can't help you if you cannot get to us.
And did you call the police multiple times?
Yeah.
What happened when you called the police?
Nothing. They seen this man's whole handprint around my neck. They didn't do nothing. The second time, when they came and they seen it again, that's when they arrested him. But the judge gave him 7 days. What good was that? No matter which way I went, I wasn't getting the help. The system don't really work for us. They fail us.
In what way?
In no way.
Yeah.
None. They don't even have a self-defense law in New York State. So if you protect yourself, you're going to prison. You're going to prison, and that's the bottom line. And I feel that that's wrong.
Now you've been out for about...
almost a year.
What's next for you? Are you going to remain an advocate for women who are incarcerated?
Yeah, most definitely. I want to help them. It's still women sitting in prison behind abuse. You know, they forget about us, but they're not forgetting about the men. Every time you turn around, it's the men this, the men that. When are y'all going to think about the women, too? I want women to know that there is help. And if I could direct them and I save 1 or 2, I'll be happy.
Well, we're really glad that you're out. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing your story. Thank you. Some of the loudest voices demanding reform in the criminal justice system are the women who have survived it. Donna Hilton is one of them, and she's dedicated her life to improving the system for women. We met at the Exodus Transitional Community Center, where a lot of work is being done to break down the flaws in mass incarceration. Can you talk about the sexual assault to prison pipeline?
Abuse is trauma. That's usually why a woman or a girl is incarcerated. We know this is just not addressed, and we feel like that's the response to it. Oh, just lock it up. Lock it up and it'll go away. We never have to deal with it again. And I'm not saying people don't need to be put into timeout. Absolutely. But incarceration has become the response to mental health. You can't run from these issues. We're like dogs chasing our tail because we're doing the same thing over and over, and it's exacerbating.
Can you talk a little bit about the policy changes that you are working on, especially when it comes to survivors of domestic violence who are incarcerated for fighting back against their abusers?
When I was inside, one of the policies that I worked on was the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act. And so we say that because it's a tongue twister, DVSJA, because it's like blah, 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 blah. We were trying to figure that out for a long time. Like, how do we break this down? Like, what do we call it? So it became that. And the bill is saying that if you can prove that abuse was a significant factor in your life. So it's not necessarily that you even have to be in prison for a domestic violence situation in the moment, but if it was a significant factor in your life to even get you to the point where you are in prison, if you can show that, then that's how the bill is able to help you. But we do have resistance. The belief was it would open the floodgates and everyone would just get out because everyone would say that, oh, they've been subjected to violence. No. That's not true. There's processes where, like, if you're applying for clemency, you have to put in an application. By the time you go through that strainer, like, you're okay if you made it. You know what I mean? To even get interviewed, to go in front of commissioners to ask for release. What we're asking for in the bill is for the person's case to be looked at like a story. Right. And not just an act or a number, or color or sex. In my experience in meeting women, spending 27 years inside, quite a bit were involved because they were coerced. They were forced into a situation. They had no choice. Should the woman be in prison for the rest of her life because she had no other recourse?
And it's often kill or be killed.
Yeah. There's a case of a woman that was sentenced to 18 years to life. She killed her abuser before he killed her. Right. Now, another case happened around the same time as hers. A man comes home from work early. He finds his wife in bed with another man. He killed his wife. He received 18 months. There's something wrong. What the hell is wrong with us? I think we have to look at ourselves and to say, okay, we really need to start listening. Our humanity is at stake.
We'd like to believe that justice is for all, but the system is biased against those who are already marginalized. And in many cases, re-victimizes those who are already victims. But with activists like Donna taking the lead, perhaps the cycle of abuse can be broken.
Never lose hope. Rest knowing that people are out here fighting for you. We're gonna get this DVSJA pass. I don't care what they say. We're gonna get it passed. I stand on that.
Something is here killing us. It's a terrible thing to watch people die of cancer and realize the suffering that they're going through, and to realize that you could be next. Welcome to Reserve, Louisiana. This is the cancer capital of the United States. But we know that people in this little town is suffering at a cancer rate that's 700 to 800 times that of the nation.
We're in what's known as Cancer Alley in Louisiana, an area between New Orleans and Baton Rouge lined with petrochemical plants and refineries. Most of the towns here are poor and black with extremely high rates of sickness and suffering. Robert Taylor has lived here all his life, and he's surprised he's made it to the age of 77.
And my mother got cancer. My brother died of lung cancer. My sister's son died of lung cancer. My wife got it, my daughter. When it wasn't close relatives, it was the next door neighbor and the people down the street.
He's currently in a legal battle against a large chemical plant a few blocks from his house. It's the only plant in the U.S. which makes chloroprene, a chemical the EPA says is a likely carcinogen.
I think the emissions need to stop. I don't think that human life should be subject to the profit motive.
What chloroprene goes to make is the neoprene material that goes in wetsuits and laptop covers. It's more of a product that's made for people's recreation.
Well, that's a part of the humiliation that we suffer. We don't even have a swimming pool in the black community. The predatory attitude that the powers that be have toward black people has not changed since slavery. The methodologies and whatnot changed, but the effect in all of this is still the same. We're still deep in slavery in America.
Reserve was once a thriving black community post-World War II. Robert's parents and many others were drawn to work in the large sugar refinery or farming the surrounding sugarcane fields. The sugar company closed in 1985, and now petrochemical companies have bought out much of the town because of its proximity to the Mississippi River, highways, and railroads. All that's left of Robert's childhood neighborhood now is this cemetery, which is ironically filled with Robert's relatives who mostly died of cancers linked to the emissions.
All of our ancestors here now are covered by this monstrosity here.
So you have to visit from here?
I had to either visit from here or I can't go on that property without, I can't even walk across now to go into the cemetery.
This is the cemetery. Across the tracks, this is where I was standing with Robert. Petrochemical companies own all of the surrounding land.
My mom and my dad in there, brothers and sisters, uncles, aunts, my grandfather. But how do look what I've got to go through. Look what I'm up against, just trying to come and visit with them.
Robert teamed up with Wilma Subra, a chemist who is doing pro bono scientific analysis for the community. They hold regular meetings to fill the town in on what's going on.
Everyone's been exposed for a very, very long time. DuPont has been making chloroprene here in Laplace Reserve area for 49 years and releasing it into the air.
DuPont operated the plant until Dinka took it over in 2015, keeping on almost all of the facility's employees.
This is the only community exposed to chloroprene at these high concentrations in the whole United States.
Chloroprene is released into the air during its production process. It can't be seen, but does give off a pungent smell. The chemical enters the body when it's breathed in, ingested, or absorbed through the skin, and is linked to liver, kidney, and digestive cancers, as well as leukemia, heart, and reproductive problems. So in your opinion, is it undeniable that it's linked?
Yes, it is totally undeniable that the link is there, yes. We have the Fifth Ward School right there with the lower elementary being really, really exposed.
This school is a big point of contention. Robert went to school here in the late 50s, early 60s during segregation. It's still a majority black school today. The school has levels of chloroprene that are 400 times higher than what the EPA says is safe to breathe.
A large percentage of these students live right here as well. So they're being bombarded, these kids are being bombarded with that, some of them 24 hours a day.
How far away is this elementary school from the plant?
1,500 feet. Wow. So yeah,
so
yeah.
It's just right beyond
right,
those trees,
yes,
right?
right beyond those trees. Those trees right there is the plant. People most affected by the negative aspects of it are the poor and the powerless, which in America, by and far, are the people of color, or black people. And what I get from them since I've been involved is just a sense of helplessness, powerlessness. How can we fight these powerful, rich organizations? Once we can get enough people to join with us, that's where our power will be. You know, we'll exercise political power. That's where our hope lies in